model. Got it. My apologies again for the oversight. I will remove all parenthetical emotional, tone, doc, sound tags and stick strictly to the script content. Part 1. Imagine a morning in Queensland, 1942. The heat rises in shimmering waves from the tarmac, blurring the edges of a makeshift world. A Douglas A-20 Havoc light bomber rumbles, a weary beast, toward a hangar forged from corrugated tin and the sheer will of men. Inside that flimsy shelter, a 43-year-old man, hands stained with grease and eyes burning with a quiet fury, stands on the precipice of changing the Pacific War. His name is Paul Irvin Gunn, but everyone just calls him Pappy. In a mere 6 hours, the aircraft he has painstakingly modified will launch an attack on a Japanese airfield at Guinea, New Guinea. If his radical modifications work, American bombers will finally gain the teeth they desperately need to tear into Japanese shipping and ground installations. But what if they fail? Men will undoubtedly die, and this innovative, older pilot will forever be remembered as the fool who squandered precious time and resources on nothing more than a crackpot idea. Yet Pappy Gunn isn't dwelling on failure. His thoughts are fixed on his wife and 4 children, trapped a staggering 1,700 miles north in a Japanese internment camp at Stunted Thomas in Manila. He remembers the Japanese convoy he watched slip past American forces just last week, agonizingly out of reach because no aircraft could get low enough, slow enough, and deadly enough to stop them. He's meticulously piecing together how a medium bomber, originally designed to drop ordnance from 12,000 feet, might be utterly transformed into something the Japanese have never, ever witnessed before. He envisions a low-level strafing monster, an aerial predator that can shred ships, suppress anti-aircraft fire with overwhelming force, and turn enemy airfields into smoldering graveyards. This isn't a simple tale of advanced technology sweeping in to solve a complex military problem. No, this is the profound story of a blacksmith's son from Arkansas. Armed with nothing more than salvaged parts from wrecked fighter planes, a collection of hand tools, and a desperate, burning need to end a war that holds his family hostage, he embarks on an impossible mission. He transforms America's conventional medium bombers into the most feared gunships in the entire Pacific. This is the story of how raw improvisation utterly defeated rigid engineering, how sheer necessity mothered an invention that would define close air support for generations, and how one man's personal fury transformed aluminum and guns into a weapon that would help shatter the Japanese empire. What personal stakes drive the most profound innovations, like stories that unveil the human spirit in wartime? Drop a comment below and tell us what you find most compelling about Pappy Gunn's resolve. The North American B-25 Mitchell bomber, fresh off the production lines at the North American Aviation Plant in Englewood, California in 1941, was never, ever meant to be a gunship. It rolled out as a medium bomber, a workhorse aircraft meticulously designed to deliver substantial bomb loads both economically and accurately, but only from moderate altitudes, typically between 8,000 and 12,000 feet. It was a formidable machine on paper, twin Wright R2600 engines, a 64-foot fuselage from nose to tail, a commanding 95-foot wingspan, a loaded weight of 33,000 pounds, a maximum speed of 230 miles per hour, and a range stretching to 1,300 miles. The Mitchell was a solid, undeniably reliable aircraft proudly named after Brigadier General William "Billy" Mitchell, the charismatic air power prophet who, in 1921, had famously proven that planes could indeed sink battleships. It carried a crew of 6, pilot, co-pilot, bombardier, navigator, radio operator, and 2 gunners. Its defensive armament, however, was critically flawed for the brutal realities of the Pacific theater. It featured a tail gun, a dorsal turret, and a ventral gun tray that took almost a full minute to extend, by which time a nimble Zero fighter could easily make 3 devastating attack passes. The waist guns, awkwardly positioned, posed as much danger to the Mitchell's own vertical tails and engine nacelles as they did to any enemy fighter. In short, the aircraft was thoroughly conventional, thoroughly tested, and yet thoroughly inadequate for the savage, close-quarters war raging in the Southwest Pacific in 1942. In the choking jungles and scattered islands of New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, altitude was not a strategic advantage. It was a luxury American bomber crews could rarely afford. The dense, unforgiving jungle environment rendered medium-level bombing largely useless. Picture a bombardier flying at 10,000 feet. He might spot a hidden ship, a camouflaged airfield, or a vital supply dump below. But actually hitting it through the impenetrable canopy while contending with intense anti-aircraft fire and being harassed by agile Zeros was an entirely different, near-impossible matter. Bombs dropped from altitude scattered wildly. Many simply disappeared into the jungle without detonating, while others landed harmlessly in the vast expanse of water. The few that did find targets often inflicted minimal damage, lacking the precision required to strike truly vulnerable points. Meanwhile, Japanese supply convoys operated relentlessly, running nightly. They sustained isolated garrisons, reinforced threatened positions, and delivered troops and vital equipment throughout their sprawling Pacific Empire. American submarines were taking a toll, certainly, but submarines couldn't be everywhere at once. The US Army Air Forces desperately needed a swift, decisive way to hammer these convoys from the air, to deny the Japanese the freedom of movement that the sheer geography of the Pacific seemed to grant them. They needed aircraft that could fly perilously low, loiter over targets with deadly intent, suppress defensive fire with overwhelming firepower, and deliver devastating, precise attacks against both ships and shore installations. But why were existing aircraft so poorly suited for this new kind of warfare? The grim reality in mid-1942 was stark. No such aircraft existed within the American inventory. Fighters like the P-40 Warhawk and P-39 Air Cobra possessed the raw speed and maneuverability for low-level attacks, but they critically lacked the range, the sheer punch of heavy armaments, and the survivability to sustain operations against heavily defended targets. Heavy bombers, such as the iconic B-17 Flying Fortress, were purpose-built for high-altitude, strategic bombing, utterly unsuited for the brutal, up-close mission of ship-busting. Light bombers like the Douglas A-20 Havoc showed glimmers of promise, but they were in dangerously short supply across the theater. The B-25 Mitchell medium bomber was becoming available in increasing numbers, potential asset, but it was designed for a completely different mission profile. What the 5th Air Force truly needed was an aircraft that seamlessly combined the extended range and substantial payload capacity of a medium bomber with the forward-firing, concentrated punch of a fighter. They needed something that could approach targets at wave-top height, virtually skimming the ocean, then suppress anti-aircraft fire with relentless streams of heavy machine gun fire. Following that, it needed to either strafe the target to pieces or, more daringly, skip-bomb it with 500-pound bombs. Bombs released so low they literally bounced across the water like flat stones before slamming into vulnerable ship hulls below the waterline. They needed a gunship, and they needed it not in months or years, but in weeks. Every single week of delay meant more Japanese supply runs successfully reaching their destinations, more reinforced enemy positions, and more American and Australian soldiers dying on brutal jungle battlefields, where effective air support often meant the harrowing difference between survival and annihilation. Enter Major General George C. Kenny, who arrived in Australia in August 1942 to assume command of Allied air forces in the Southwest Pacific Theatre. Kenny, at 53 years old, was a veteran of the First World War and a man with absolutely no patience for orthodoxy when strict adherence to it was actively getting his men killed. He immediately embarked on a whirlwind tour of his scattered bases, relentlessly searching for solutions to the tactical problems that were bleeding his bomber force white. At Charter Towers Airfield, south of Townsville in Queensland, he stumbled upon something truly interesting. He found a grizzled, grease-stained former Navy pilot in his early 40s, toiling away in a makeshift shelter on a Douglas A-20 Havoc, meticulously converting it from a standard light bomber into something else entirely. Paul Irvin Gunn, affectionately called Pappy by everyone who knew him, because at 43 he was considered ancient by then Air Force standards, was unlike any officer Kenny had ever encountered. Gunn had enlisted in the Navy in 1918, serving 21 years first as an aviation mechanic, then a naval aviation pilot, retiring in December 1939 as a chief petty officer. He was an undisputed expert in low-level flying, a naturally gifted aircraft mechanic, and a man who understood airplanes the way a master blacksmith understands iron, because he could literally shape them with his own hands. After leaving the Navy, Gunn had moved his family to the Philippines, where he helped establish Philippine Airlines, flying 5 privately owned Beechcraft aircraft on crucial cargo and passenger routes throughout the islands. What kind of leader is willing to defy convention for a desperate advantage? Enjoying this deep dive into innovation? Tap subscribe so you don't miss what's next. When the Japanese launched their devastating attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Gunn found himself caught in Manila. Major General Louis Brereton, then commander of the Far East Air Force, immediately commandeered Philippine Airlines aircraft and personnel. Gunn was swiftly sworn into the Army Air Forces as a captain, given command of a makeshift air transport squadron, and handed a perilous order: evacuate military personnel from Japanese-held territory. For the next 6 harrowing weeks, Gunn flew mission after mission, plunging into hostile airspace in unarmored Beechcraft planes. He brought out invaluable pilots, ferried desperately needed supplies to besiege troops on Bataan, and performed feats of low-level flying that earned him a formidable reputation, either as the bravest or the craziest pilot in the entire Philippines. He even survived being shot down once, crashing into a coconut plantation, only to be miraculously rescued by the plantation owner, someone he had flown as a passenger during peacetime. Eventually, in late January 1942, Gunn flew one of the very last aircraft out of the Philippines to Australia, carrying key personnel to safety. But he left something behind, something that would fuel his every waking moment. His wife, Clara Louise, and their 4 children, Nathaniel, Connie, Julie, and Paul Jr., were tragically trapped in Manila when the city fell. On January 20, 1942, the Japanese rounded up American and Allied civilians and interned them at the University of Stumted Thomas. Pappy Gunn's family would remain prisoners there for 3 agonizing years, living on starvation rations, subjected to brutal discipline, slowly wasting away while he fought from Australia, completely unable to reach them, unable to protect them. His only recourse was to kill as many Japanese as humanly possible, in the desperate, burning hope that ending the war faster might somehow save their lives. This was the man General Kenny discovered, quietly working on an A-20 in a tin shelter at Charter Towers in August 1942. This was the man who, when asked what he was doing, explained with intense focus that he was meticulously installing 4 50 caliber machine guns into the bombardier's nose, replacing the fragile transparent plexiglass with solid metal, thus transforming the light bomber into a dedicated low-level strafer. This new configuration, he believed, could effectively suppress anti-aircraft fire and tear enemy aircraft and ground installations to pieces. Kenny, intrigued, inquired about the source of these crucial machine guns. Gunn explained without a hint of hesitation that he was scavenging them from wrecked fighters, P-40 Warhawks and P-39 Air Cobras, scattered across various Australian airfields, damaged beyond repair but with functional weapons. The 5th Air Force's supply of 50 caliber machine guns was severely limited throughout the Southwest Pacific. There was simply never enough. So Gunn did what any good mechanic, driven by desperation, does. He improvised. He found the wrecks, he salvaged the guns, he fabricated custom mounts, he tested, adjusted, tested again. He made it work because making it work was literally the only option. General Kenny was deeply impressed. This old sailor, this master mechanic, understood something that headquarters staff in comfortable offices never would: that war is not won by rigidly following procedures, but by boldly solving problems, and that the very best solutions often emerge from people who understand their tools intimately enough to bend them to entirely new, unforeseen purposes. Kenny immediately placed Gunn on his personal staff as a special projects officer, giving him a simple, direct mandate: convert more aircraft, make them deadlier, and do it fast. Gunn set to work with a fury that astonished everyone around him. He wasn't just an engineer methodically solving a technical problem. He was a father fighting tooth and nail, trying to save his family by desperately shortening a brutal war. Every aircraft he modified, every sortie that aircraft flew, every Japanese ship sunk or airfield destroyed brought the war infinitesimally closer to Manila, closer to Stunted Thomas, closer to his wife and children. Fury is a powerful motivator, but what about desperation? Can it be an even more powerful engineer? By early September 1942, Gunn had successfully converted several A-20s into fearsome strafers. Modifications were undeniably crude, reflecting the wartime necessity and limited resources, but they were remarkably effective. Each sported 450 caliber Browning M2 machine guns mounted menacingly in the nose. Solid metal panels had replaced the bombardier's transparent station, offering better protection and a stable mounting platform. Additional ammunition storage was cleverly integrated, and the bomb racks were modified to carry a new, ingenious weapon: parachute fragmentation bombs. These small bombs, slowed by parachutes, allowed the attacking aircraft to escape the blast radius even at ultra-low altitude. The parafrag bombs would float gently down over enemy airfields and installations, exploding above parked aircraft and fuel dumps, showering them with red-hot fragments and white phosphorus, a terrifying combination that set fire to everything the fragments touched. The newly converted A-20s were first tested in the crucible of combat on September 12, 1942, in a daring raid against the Japanese airfield at Buna, New Guinea. The results shattered every expectation. Flying at wave-top height and tree-top level, the strafers roared in before defenders could even react, suppressing anti-aircraft fire with devastating streams of 50 caliber armor-piercing rounds. Then they released their parafrag bombs directly over the target. Japanese fighters, caught helplessly on the ground, exploded into fiery wreckage. Fuel dumps detonated in massive plumes of black smoke. Buildings disintegrated under the onslaught. The lightly constructed Japanese aircraft, designed for agility and range rather than armor, simply tore apart under the half-inch bullets traveling at an incredible 2,900 feet per second. The strafers pulled up and away, leaving behind a trail of destruction that looked, to the horrified defenders, like the wrath of an angry god. General Kenny, witnessing this unparalleled success, immediately ordered Gunn to apply the same principles to the B-25 Mitchell. This was a significantly larger challenge. The A-20 was a light bomber, relatively small, and comparatively easy to modify. The B-25, however, was a medium bomber, larger, more complex, with entirely different aerodynamics and structural considerations. Adding substantial weight to the nose of an aircraft dramatically affects its center of gravity, which in turn impacts its stability and handling. Installing heavy guns creates powerful recoil forces that the airframe must be engineered to absorb. Modifying a bomber designed for high-altitude level flight to perform perilous low-level strafing runs meant accepting risks that no engineer at North American Aviation would ever have approved in peacetime. But Pappy Gunn didn't work for North American Aviation. He worked for General Kenny. And General Kenny didn't care about what the manual said was possible. He cared intensely about what needed to be done to win the war. Gunn found assistance in Jack Fox, a North American Aviation technical representative stationed at Charter Towers. Fox dutifully sent drawings of Gunn's proposed modifications back to the factory in Long Beach, California. However, there were too few B-25s in the theater to spare any for experimental modifications yet. The first deliveries were critically needed for conventional bombing missions. Gunn would have to endure the agonizing wait for more aircraft to arrive before he could begin the comprehensive conversions that would ultimately define the rest of the Pacific Air War. The waiting was sheer agony for him. Every passing day meant more Japanese supply runs, more enemy reinforcements, more American soldiers dying on brutal jungle battlefields, and, most painfully, more time his family spent in that internment camp. Gunn, never one to stand idle, flew combat missions himself, rigorously testing his A-20 conversions, refining the nascent tactics, and proving the concept's undeniable lethality. He flew more missions than almost any other man in the theater, accumulating an astonishing number of combat hours and enemy kills, earning 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, the Air Medal, and eventually 9 Purple Hearts, 9 separate wounds. 9 times he bled in combat, and yet he kept flying. How does personal anguish drive such relentless innovation and courage? By late 1942, B-25 Mitchells were finally arriving in Australia in significantly greater numbers, and General Kenny, seeing the continued success, swiftly authorized Gunn to officially begin the comprehensive conversion program. Working with a small, dedicated team of mechanics, Gunn established a B-25 conversion center at Townsville. The modifications were extensive and transformative. First, the transparent bombardier's nose was completely removed, replaced by robust, solid metal panels. Then came the true innovation. 8 .50 caliber Browning machine guns were installed, 4 menacingly in the nose and another 4 in underwing blisters or fuselage packages. Some aircraft, pushing the limits, even received additional guns with 2 more forward-firing guns added in cheek blisters on either side of the nose, bringing the total forward-firing armament to an astounding 10 or even 12 heavy machine guns. Furthermore, the dorsal turrets, typically defensive, were modified so their guns could be synchronized to fire forward with the fixed guns, meaning some B-25s could bring a staggering 14 .50 caliber machine guns to bear on a target simultaneously. Imagine that, 14 .50 caliber machine guns, each capable of firing 850 rounds per minute. Each round was a half-inch diameter armor-piercing projectile, traveling at an incredible 2,900 feet per second. 14 guns equated to a combined rate of fire of 11,900 rounds per minute, nearly 200 rounds per second, creating a cone of destruction so dense, so utterly overwhelming, that anything caught within its path simply disintegrated. These conversions, however, took time, weeks, not overnight. This was not a single desperate night of improvisation, but a sustained, arduous program of modification and rigorous testing. Each aircraft had to be meticulously modified to maintain its structural integrity. The guns had to be precisely aligned, test-fired, and adjusted. Ammunition feed systems had to be installed and debugged, a complex task in itself. Pilots, too, had to learn entirely new tactics for an aircraft that now handled differently, weighed more heavily in the nose, and required specialized flying techniques to compensate for the significant weight of all those guns and all that ammunition. But the results, when they finally emerged, were devastatingly clear. The first squadron of Strafer B-25s was declared ready for combat in early 1943. They would prove their unprecedented worth in the most dramatic fashion imaginable, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea. It would become one of the most one-sided victories in the entire history of naval aviation, a battle that would demonstrate, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that Pappy Gunn's jury-rigged gunships had irrevocably changed the Pacific War forever. In the first days of March 1943, intelligence reports, urgent and precise, reached General Kenny's headquarters in Port Moresby, New Guinea. A massive Japanese convoy was assembling at Rabaul. 8 transport ships crammed with nearly 7,000 troops, escorted by 8 destroyers. Their destination, Lae, New Guinea, where Japanese forces were facing intense pressure from Allied advances. The convoy represented a colossal reinforcement effort, enough troops to potentially turn the tide of the ground campaign, and enough supplies to sustain Japanese resistance for months. General Kenny understood the gravity of the situation. He knew exactly what he had to do. The convoy had to be destroyed, not merely damaged, not just delayed, but utterly annihilated. Every ship, every soldier, every ton of supplies. Because if those 7,000 troops reached Lae, American and Australian soldiers would undoubtedly pay for it in blood on unforgiving jungle battlefields, where the enemy already held every conceivable advantage terrain could provide. What makes a commander commit to such an audacious and risky plan? Kenny knew he had the aircraft to execute this audacious plan. He had B-17 flying fortresses for conventional high-altitude bombing. He possessed B-25 Mitchells, both the standard conventional bombers and Pappy Gunn's revolutionary Strafer conversions. He also had A-20 Havocs, similarly modified for low-level attacks. For escort and additional strafing, P-38 Lightning fighters were available. Crucially, he also possessed a new, terrifying tactic that had been tested in smaller engagements but never unleashed against a target of this scale, this level of defense, and this strategic importance. Skip bombing. The concept of skip bombing was deceptively simple in theory, yet absolutely terrifying in its execution. A bomber would approach its target at an extremely low altitude, often 200 feet or less, sometimes skimming as low as 50 feet above the waves. At point-blank range, perhaps a quarter mile from the target ship, the bomber would release its bombs with a slight upward trajectory. The bombs, instead of diving, would skip across the water like flat stones thrown by children across a pond. Except these stones weighed 500 pounds and were packed with high explosives. They would skip once, perhaps twice, and then slam into the ship's hull at, or, even more devastatingly, below the waterline, precisely where naval architects knew a ship was most vulnerable. The resulting explosion would tear open the hull to the sea, causing the ship to flood and ultimately sink. But skip bombing demanded unimaginable courage. It required pilots to fly directly at heavily armed warships through terrifying walls of anti-aircraft fire. They had to fly low enough that a single mistake meant hitting the water and disintegrating, and slow enough that enemy gunners had precious seconds to aim. They had to be close enough that if the bomb detonated prematurely, the attacking aircraft would be caught and destroyed in its own blast radius. It required nerves of steel, perfect timing, and, most critically, aircraft that could suppress that relentless anti-aircraft fire long enough for the bombers to release their ordnance and escape. It required Pappy Gunn's Strafer B-25s. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea commenced on March 2, 1943. The Japanese convoy departed Rabaul, steaming southwest through the Solomon Sea toward the Huon Gulf and Lae. Australian reconnaissance aircraft spotted the convoy and began shadowing it, diligently reporting its position and course. General Kenny mobilized his air groups. Bombers and fighters roared off from bases throughout New Guinea and northern Australia. The weather was abysmal: heavy clouds, relentless rain squalls, and severely poor visibility. Yet this terrible weather paradoxically worked in the Allies' favour, allowing their aircraft to approach unseen until the very last, critical moment. The initial attacks were conventional. B-17 flying fortresses bombed from altitude on March 2nd and 3rd, scoring few direct hits but crucially, forcing the convoy to maneuver constantly, significantly slowing its progress. Then on the morning of March 3rd, the weather cleared and Kenny unleashed the strafers. The modified B-25s and A-20s descended, coming in perilously low, so low that their propellers were churning spray from the wave tops. They approached in precision formation, a terrifying wall of aircraft bearing down on the convoy at over 200 miles per hour. The Japanese ships saw them coming, and anti-aircraft guns immediately erupted. 20mm and 25mm cannons spewed forth walls of explosive shells. Heavier 40mm guns pumped rounds in arcing trajectories. The sky filled with tracer fire, with ominous black puffs of exploding shells with the smoke and fury of a desperate defense. And then the strafers opened fire. 14 50 caliber machine guns per aircraft, with multiple aircraft attacking simultaneously. Thousands of rounds per second hammered into the Japanese ships. The effect was nothing short of apocalyptic. Anti-aircraft gun crews were scythed down where they stood. Gun shields were perforated like fragile paper. Bridge windows shattered. Superstructures were shredded into twisted metal. The armor-piercing rounds punched through light armor, ricocheted off steel bulkheads, tore through wooden structures, sparked fires, and detonated ammunition. The Japanese gunners who, by some miracle, survived the initial onslaught found themselves completely suppressed, unable to aim, unable to fire, forced to take cover as half-inch bullets tore apart everything around them. And in that crucial, terrifying window of suppressed fire, the skip-bombing B-25s and conventional Mitchells released their deadly loads. 500-pound bombs skipped across the water. Some missed. War is never perfect, but many hit. They slammed into holes below the waterline. They exploded with the force of half a ton of high explosive concentrated against the weakest part of the ship's structure. Steel plates buckled, welds failed, and the sea poured in. The transport ships, heavily laden with troops and supplies, were particularly vulnerable. They were not warships, they lacked armored hulls or sophisticated damage control. When the bombs hit, when their hulls opened to the Pacific, they began sinking immediately. Troops below decks trapped in flooding compartments had nowhere to go. The ships settled lower in the water, listed violently to one side, then capsized or broke apart, and slid beneath the waves. The destroyers fared slightly better. They were warships designed to take punishment, but even they could not withstand the coordinated, overwhelming assault. One destroyer took a bomb amidships and broke cleanly in half. Another was so riddled with .50 caliber fire that it became unmanageable, drifting in circles as fires raged unchecked. A third destroyer, attempting to rescue survivors from a sinking transport, was caught by strafers and turned into a floating funeral pyre. This terrifying, brutal coordination, did it truly mark a new chapter in naval warfare? The battle raged for 3 relentless days. Every time the Japanese attempted to rescue survivors, Allied aircraft mysteriously appeared, seemingly out of nowhere. Every time a damaged ship tried to limp away, it was mercilessly attacked again. The Strafer B-25s hunted like a pack of relentless wolves, working in seamless coordination with conventional bombers, with agile fighters, and with reconnaissance aircraft, tirelessly spotting new targets. They deployed the new parachute fragmentation bombs, artfully floating them down over the decks of destroyers, brutally killing exposed personnel, sparking devastating fires, and sowing utter chaos. They even strafed lifeboats and debris fields, not out of wanton cruelty, but because those survivors were soldiers who, if rescued, would inevitably fight again on New Guinea's brutal battlefields. By March 4th, the Battle of the Bismarck Sea was definitively over. The results were absolutely staggering. All 8 Japanese transport ships were sunk. 4 destroyers were sunk and 3 others were heavily damaged, effectively put out of action. Approximately 3,000 Japanese soldiers were killed in the sinking ships or drowned in the churning water. Fewer than 1,000 managed to reach land, and most of those were immediately captured or killed by waiting Allied forces. The entire reinforcement effort was annihilated. The vital supplies that were supposed to sustain the Japanese garrison at Leh for months now lay at the bottom of the Bismarck Sea. Allied losses: 4 aircraft shot down, 13 aircrew killed or missing. It was undeniably one of the most one-sided victories in the entire history of warfare. And at the very heart of it, making it all possible, were Pappy Gunn's modified B-25s. The strafers that had suppressed defensive fire, that allowed the skip bombers to approach, that tore Japanese ships apart with concentrated, overwhelming machine gun fire. General Kenny, recognizing the unparalleled success, immediately ordered more conversions. Word of the devastating new weapons spread like wildfire throughout the theater. Other air forces clamored for the strafers. The 13th Air Force sent B-25s to Brisbane for conversion. Depot engineers at Tontuta began modifying aircraft. The 10th Air Force in India eagerly adopted the modifications. What had begun as one man's desperate improvisation in a tin hangar in Queensland swiftly became standard practice across the entire Pacific theater. But the story doesn't end with tactical success alone, because North American aviation back in California had been watching closely. Factory representatives had been meticulously sending reports about Gunn's groundbreaking modifications. Engineers in Long Beach had been studying the combat results, and they had begun incorporating Gunn's innovations into new production models. In late 1943, North American proudly introduced the B-25G model. The transparent bombardier's nose was gone, replaced by a solid metal nose, housing an imposing 75mm M4 cannon, essentially a tank gun mounted in an aircraft. This cannon fired 3-pound high-explosive shells that could engage ships from 2 miles away and sink smaller vessels with a single thunderous hit. 4 .50 caliber machine guns supplemented the cannon. The concept was undeniably innovative, but the execution proved problematic. The 75mm cannon produced tremendous recoil. Each time it fired, the entire aircraft shuddered violently. Pilots struggled to keep the aircraft stable. The cannon was manually loaded, agonizingly slow to reload, and quickly exhausted its limited ammunition supply. After just 7 weeks of combat, units equipped with the B-25G had expended all their 75mm ammunition. The cannon armed Mitchells, while an interesting experiment, ultimately proved less effective than Pappy Gunn's simpler yet profoundly more lethal solution: more machine guns. The B-25H model appeared next, with 1,000 aircraft built featuring even more machine guns. The cumbersome 75mm cannon was replaced with a lighter 14-gun version, boasting 8 in the nose, 4 in side blisters, and 2 in the dorsal turret. Some H models also carried rockets, 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets that could be ripple-fired in devastating salvos. But the ultimate, most powerful expression of Pappy Gunn's vision was the B-25J, introduced in 1944. North American built over 4,000 J models. Many were delivered with transparent noses for conventional bombing, but the air depot system quickly created conversion kits, the strafer nose option. When a J model was converted to a strafer, it carried an astonishing 1850 caliber machine guns, 8 in the nose, 4 in the fuselage packages, 2 in the dorsal turret, 1 in each waist position, and 2 in the tail. A staggering 14 of those 18 guns fired directly forward. 1850 caliber machine guns on a single aircraft. This equated to a mind-boggling 5300 rounds per minute, combined rate of fire over 250 rounds per second. A B-25J strafer firing all forward guns simultaneously put more lead into the air than an entire infantry company could fire with their rifles. The effect on targets was not mere destruction, it was utter disintegration. Could such overwhelming firepower fundamentally reshape ground combat tactics? These heavily armed Mitchells continued their relentless devastation of Japanese targets throughout New Guinea, the Philippines, and Okinawa until the very end of the war. They systematically strafed airfields, obliterating parked aircraft. They aggressively attacked bridges, severing crucial supply lines. They hunted coastal barges and small vessels with ruthless efficiency. And most critically, they supported ground troops with devastatingly precise close air support, becoming an indispensable asset. They were so incredibly effective that captured enemy documents explicitly warned Japanese forces not to dare attack when the strafers were overhead, stating plainly that weapons are useless against them and attacking will only infuriate the monsters. The strafer crews, hardened by combat, developed their own unique tactics and forged a formidable, terrifying reputation. They flew perilously low, often low enough to discern the expressions on enemy soldiers' faces. They approached from unexpected angles, soaring over mountains, weaving up valleys, hugging coastlines, masterfully using terrain to mask their approach until the very last split-second moment. They worked in coordinated pairs or flights, one aircraft suppressing enemy fire with a storm of lead, while another delivered the killing blow. They were feared, they were hated, they were merciless. And behind every one of those terrifying aircraft was Pappy Gunn's desperate fury, meticulously channeled into engineering, brutally transformed into raw lethality. Major Gunn, deservedly promoted for his unprecedented innovations and his exceptional combat record, was eventually sent back to the United States. His mission, to oversee factory production of the new B-25 variants at North American Aviation. It was a profound recognition of his monumental contributions, an official acknowledgement that his field modifications had been so spectacularly successful that they needed to be fully incorporated into all production aircraft. But Gunn, driven by a deeper personal war, didn't crave recognition. He desperately yearned to be in the Pacific fighting, killing Japanese, shortening the war that held his family hostage. He returned to the Pacific as soon as humanly possible, continuing to fly combat missions and taking risks that made his commanders perpetually nervous. In late 1944, a Japanese bombing attack on Leyte in the Philippines caught him on the ground. He was wounded, his 9th Purple Heart, badly enough that he was finally removed from active combat. The war continued without him, but by then, the strafer program he had pioneered was so thoroughly integrated into Pacific air operations that it no longer needed his constant, direct oversight. In February 1945, American forces liberated Manila. They fought house to house, building to building, against fanatical Japanese defenders who would rather die than surrender. On February 3rd, American troops reached the University of Stowe, Thomas. They found over 3,000 internees, starving, sick, and profoundly traumatized by 3 agonizing years of captivity. Among them were Clara Louise Gunn and her 4 children. Pappy Gunn was finally reunited with his family. They were alive, barely, malnourished, traumatized, forever marked by their horrific ordeal, but miraculously, they were alive. The war he had fought so desperately to shorten, the audacious modifications he had made, the perilous missions he had flown, the Japanese he had killed, all of it, every sacrifice, every moment of fury, was for this single, life-affirming moment. His family had survived. The Philippines were liberated. The war, though still grinding on, was finally staggering toward its inevitable conclusion. How much does personal trauma fuel the drive for victory, and what is its true cost? Colonel Paul Irvin Pappy Gunn retired from the Army Air Forces as a full colonel on June 30th, 1948, medically retired due to his accumulated severe wounds. He returned to the Philippines, a place deeply etched into his soul, to rebuild Philippine Airlines, the company he had helped start before the war. The airline, under his renewed vision and tireless effort, expanded dramatically, providing crucial flights across the South Pacific and rapidly becoming one of the region's major carriers. Gunn, ever the aviator, flew again, not in the brutal crucible of combat, but in the serene pursuit of commerce, carrying passengers and cargo instead of guns and fury. Yet on October 11, 1957, at the age of 57, Colonel Paul Irvin Pappy Gunn tragically died when his chartered Beech 18 aircraft crashed in a fierce storm over the Philippines. He had survived 21 years in the Navy, 5 years of brutal, unforgiving combat in the Pacific War, endured 9 combat wounds, countless close calls, and the profound, agonizing loss of nearly everything he cared about during those dark years when his family was imprisoned. A sudden, violent storm over the islands he loved so deeply finally claimed him. But his legacy, a testament to raw ingenuity and desperate courage, endures. The fundamental strafer concept he pioneered did not die with him. During the Korean War, modified B-25s, directly employing the same tactics Gunn had developed, provided invaluable close air support. The principle of heavy, forward-firing armament mounted on a stable platform, once a radical field modification, became accepted doctrine. In the 1960s, as the United States began developing purpose-built,